You always hope, of course, that nobody is thinking about what's going on inside the code. There's all of these ball and socket joints and wires articulating it. All of this is to really trick the viewer into believing that the puppet has got a weighted real code and that it's moving just how you would expect it to. My name is Georgina Hayns. I'm the puppet fabrication supervisor on Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio. What I'm going to talk to you about today is how do you make puppets for a stop motion animated film?
They love me, they accept me!
Enough of this.
In design and concept, it came from this amazing illustrator, Grizz Grimley. And, in our version of the story, when Geppetto is actually creating him, he's actually, been drinking a little too much. And so half of him is almost perfectly carved and the other half is just sort of left half carved. When he first comes into being, Guillermo really wanted it to be a kind of Frankenstein-esque sort of creation story. So when you first see Pinocchio walking, he doesn't know how to walk. He's a wooden boy that's never walked before. So he evolves as a character and he becomes more humanistic in his characteristics, but he never becomes human and he never wants to become a boy. There was different puppet making groups that came together. The two main groups was Shadow Machine in Portland and McKinnon and Saunders in England. And McKinnon and Saunders had been working with 3D printed metal. This back plate of the puppet is all 3D printed in metal. All of the wood grain, the nails on the back, that all comes out of the metal printer. And then the internal sort of spine structure, this is all for rigging. Because Pinocchio is so active, he's jumping, he's flying, he's doing all these crazy things, he's dancing. The rigging department would use all of these square sections and we'd have separate sort of extra plates that we could put on with a hole on the side. And then from that, we made metal armature parts for the arms and the legs and the feet, which then had ball and socket joints or 3D printed joints. So all of his sort of shoulder and hip joints, which were actually part of his design, we used again the 3D metal printing technique to create this perfectly engineered kind of like ball and socket joint that didn't look like one of our standard ball and socket joints we use for puppets, but looks like the design of Pinocchio. Most of the characters in our movie, most of the human characters, we use silicon and tiny head mechanics to articulate their heads. But with Pinocchio, because he's a wooden boy, and because he's got wood grain, and we actually did an early test and the silicon looked like rubber. It didn't read as wood at all. You got the detail of the wood grain, but it just, the minute it moved, it didn't read as wood. So we decided to do him, and he's like the only full replacement puppet on the show.
One which belonged to a very special boy.
Carlo.
Replacement animation is where you're literally moving the mouth shapes and the eyes frame by frame by taking masks off. So each mask has a different shaped mouth and eyes. So we 3D printed all of these masks. So you model the face in the computer and you then animate, you sort of meld that face into the shapes you want and then you print it out. I think that's what makes him really believable as a wooden boy next to all these human characters. When we're doing replacement faces, we generally cut the face in half so that we can get eyebrow expression and mouth expression in separate parts, and then we'll just erase the line with a computer afterwards. But our little Pinocchio has got wood grain crossing where that line would go. And he hasn't really got eyes. The design of him is the eyes are a negative. They're actually tiny little holes. We were just racking our brains. How are we going to give him eye expression as well as mouth expression without having to print thousands and thousands of faces? We noticed the original design on the face, his eyes essentially are held within wooden knots. So the knot that you would get when you cut into some wood. We went to Guillermo and said, well, if we can kind of join the outer shape of the knot, we could actually have those as another replacement part. So rather than separating it from top to bottom as a face and having a straight line, why don't we use the wood grain of the knots? And we ended up having replacement plug-in eyes with the replacement masks of the face. And then, of course, the nose has to animate as well because his nose grows and turns into branches and things. So that was another separate part.
I am not lying!
Each of Pinocchio's noses has a square hole that is actually printed into the nose. And the head core of Pinocchio has a square peg, a metal square peg that is projecting out of the front of the face. So essentially, it allowed us to literally slide any nose shape over this steel square peg. And that's what allowed us to replace the noses for the nose growing into the twig, the nose growing into the tree, sequence, because it was a steel square peg and it was attached firmly into the core of the head of the puppet. It actually allowed for quite a lot of weight to go onto that face before we had to then rig it from, sort of externally rig the puppet. And then if you need to take the face plate off and change it with another expression, again, you have to take the nose off. And then you literally take the whole face plate. The eyes are separate plugins, so they come out, and then you slide a new face, and the nose helps locate where that face is going to be. And then you get whichever eyes go with that sequence, and you plug your eyes in.
Carlo!
Guillermo's version of Pinocchio is very Geppetto heavy. Guillermo wanted him to be the most expressive of the human characters. Traditionally, most puppets that I myself have worked on, and McKinnon and Saunders especially have worked on, are more sort of humanoid head mechanic puppets. So head mechanics is where you have a silicon skin that sits over what looks a little bit like a skull, but instead of having muscles moving the skin, there's tiny little articulated ball and socket joints and gears. So there's strings sometimes that are cast into the corners of the mouths, which are then they go into the head, into a little gear system, which has cranks and Allen key accesses through the ear. We were really lucky with him that he has a beard and a moustache and he's older. So when you're sculpting characters like that and you've got creases already embedded into the structure of the face, that helps silicon skin sort of crease in the right place. But underneath his skin is this elaborate sort of like collection of lip paddles. So he's got 4 lip paddles that sit into his moustache. So he has 2 outer lip paddles that can move his moustache, and sort of smile and frown. And then he has 2 inner lip paddles that can get the ooh expression of the top lip. And then on the bottom jaw, he's got, again, 4 lip paddles that sit in the bottom lip. Once you've got the skin sitting over the mechanics and you've got the articulation of the face working, all of these characters have some kind of hair, whether it be facial hair or whether it be, sort of hair on their head or wigs or whatever. So we decided it was going to be a hybrid between sculpted hair and then fine strands of like a mohair.
I don't have time or patience enough to explain that to you.
I think the most challenging part of all of the characters across the board was the eyes. It's not just solely the eyes, it's the way that the eyes interact with the eyebrows. We wanted the eyeballs themselves to have depth, to feel almost human. We made most of our eyeballs with rapid prototype 3D printed core, which we then put an iris pupil graphic on, and then dropped the whole thing into a mold and embedded it in clear resin to get the lens quality. So this is the scary, sharp tool that the animators would go in with to animate and move the eyes. So each movement of the puppet, each frame that the animator is going to take, they're moving the eyeball and the pupil and the iris literally sort of a couple of millimeters and an 1/8 of an inch at a time, and then they're also having to go in and move the blink. So I'm moving the lower blink here, and each movement, take a frame of film, then move the eye, blink down, take a frame of film.
Only day that our cacophonous carnival will visit.
All of our puppets, of course, have a wardrobe, have costumes. So with a character like Count Volpe that has this long flowing coat, with all the fabrics, we have to think about the scale of the weave and, what is the fabric that's going to sort of cheat the human eye so that you believe with Count Volpe, he's wearing a tweed coat. You can see here, if I move his coat without intention, it springs back, and that's because it has wires which are laced into it all the way around the outside. They also link into the sort of the body of the puppet, so we call it grounding those wires so that the wires have something to move from. And this is really how the animator, frame by frame, gets that feel of flow of fabrics.
As I see it, you were charged with a terrible burden.
We wanted these puppets to be practical stop-motion puppets. So we figured out the scale of how large can we make the creatures so that an animator can actually still move them frame by frame. The nice thing with Guillermo's designs for his creatures is that they're stylized. There's a lot going on, but they are quite stylized. So we were able to sculpt all of the wings on the front surfaces, and then on the back surfaces, we actually chose a fur fabric we found, which was almost scale-like, that was inspired by the bark that we were using as well. It was early days that some tests with cardboard, sort of layering of cardboard were done for bark, and shingles and things like that. And they were very inspiring to how we ended up doing the scales and the fur and the feathers on the creatures. What was lovely about the dogfish is when we made her, she was perfect for foam latex. So foam latex is something that we often just use on the inside of a puppet, and we don't use it for skin anymore because it has a wrinkly quality. And turns out when you're making a dogfish for Pinocchio, that wrinkly quality is perfect. What we were able to do when we were building the creatures is embrace all of the sort of the techniques that we'd learned throughout our careers and use the best technique depending on which creature we were working on. It was about making these creatures as believable and as lightweight and as animatable as possible. So we really did pool all of our knowledge together on those, and they were fun. They were super fun to make.
You will stay here with me a little longer each time you cross, until the end of time.